November 5th, 1943. Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Inside the Combined Fleet headquarters. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, damp wool uniforms, and the faint, sour bite of fuel oil drifting in from the anchorage. A ceiling fan turns lazily, pushing warm air across a table littered with convoy track charts and message logs. Red grease pencil lines crisscross the Pacific like veins. Most of them end the same way abruptly, in a tight knot of scribbled symbols that mean torpedoes, explosions, and silence. Admiral Minichi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, stands with his hands behind his back, shoulders square, face unreadable. His staff officers sit rigidly, eyes lowered until they are called on. Nobody wants to be the one to say it out loud, because to say it is to admit the ocean itself has turned against them. A young communications officer clears his throat. His voice is controlled, but it trembles on the first syllable. Report from the transport group. Convoy Te Nos 2 departed Saipan as scheduled. 2 days out. Multiple submarines attacked in sequence. Escort commander states the enemy arrived at the interception point as if guided there. Guided. The word lands like a dropped wrench in a quiet engine room. Koga does not turn. He watches the charts, the lines, the dead ends. Behind the glass of his office windows, you can just make out the silhouettes of ships in the lagoon, at anchor, immobile as if afraid to move and be noticed. Another officer, a lieutenant commander with ink-stained fingers, slides a page forward. It is a neat stack of decoded Japanese transmissions, their own, copied from fleet logs, time-stamped, routed, signed. This is the 4th convoy in 5 weeks that reports the same pattern. Sir, not random sightings, not a chance encounter. The enemy appears where our route bends away from known patrol areas. They strike where escorts are thinnest. Koga finally turns, and in that movement the room tightens. His gaze goes to the escort commander's testimony, then to the plotted positions of the attacks. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. American submarines are aggressive, he says. But aggression is not accuracy. A senior staff captain, older, face drawn from sleeplessness, speaks carefully. We have investigated the possibilities. Civilian ports may talk, harbor workers, fishermen, merchants, but the attacks occur far from coastlines. Koga's eyes narrow. Then what remains? Silence again, broken only by the fan and the scratch of pencil as someone unconsciously redraws a line that will not change the truth. In a smaller room down the corridor, behind a locked door, the fleet's cryptographic section listens to radio traffic in headphones that press hot against their ears. The receivers crackle. The operators write in tight blocks of kana, then hand the notes to clerks who bundle them for encoding. Everything is procedure. Everything is discipline. Yet it is all built on one assumption that the enemy cannot see what they see. Out on the sea lanes, Japanese captains feel the opposite. You can imagine it through their reports. The way the words are chosen. A long night, black water, escorts throwing foam off their bows. A look at the sky, at the horizon, at nothing at all. Then the sudden white line of a wake. The shock of impact, the scream of metal. The terrible pause after the first hit, when everyone waits for the second. Back in Truk, Koga's staff lays out the ugly arithmetic. Oil from Borneo, ammunition from Japan, troops for the Solomons, for New Guinea, for wherever the next American landing will bite. Every ship sunk is not just steel and cargo. It is time, fuel, pilots grounded for lack of aviation gasoline, garrisons that eat their last rice and wonder why the promised convoy never comes. Our rear admiral, recently arrived from Rabaul, speaks with a rasp from too many hours under bombing raids. Sir, our destroyers are being bled white as escorts. They chase contacts that vanish, and the transports die anyway. If this continues, we will have escorts without cargoes, and cargoes without escorts. Koga's jaw tightens. Then we will adjust routing. We already have, the Rear Admiral replies. Then stops, realizing how it sounds. Koga does not punish him for it. That is what makes it worse. Another officer steps in, cautious but insistent. There is a possibility that the Americans are reading our traffic. The room freezes. Nobody wants to be associated with defeatism, with excuses. Yet everyone has thought it. Koga's eyes move, slow and sharp, over each face. Our codes are secure. The officer swallows. Secure in theory, sir. But if a code book is compromised, if an operator is careless, if patterns are detected, Koga's voice remains level. Do you suggest a traitor? No, sir, not necessarily. But something is leaking. It may be method, not man. It may be the radio itself. For a moment, Koga looks back at the chart. The Pacific is too big for this kind of precision. Too big for coincidence to repeat week after week. Convoy after convoy, at the exact point where their ships should have been safest. When he speaks again, it is not anger. It is the cold sound of a commander recognizing a new kind of battlefield. From now on, Koga says, reduce transmissions, shorten messages. Use alternate routing without prior broadcast whenever possible. And review every cipher procedure. Every one. He pauses. And the staff leans in without meaning to, because it feels like the moment before a torpedo hits, the moment when instinct tells you the water is wrong. If the Americans are seeing our supply lines, Koga adds quietly, then the ocean is no longer neutral. It is their weapon, outside. The lagoon glitters under the sun, deceptively calm, and somewhere beyond that horizon, American submarines already wait in the places they should not know to wait. The enemy was waiting. Late November 1943 becomes early December. A string of freighters limp into anchorages with holes stitched by emergency plates. Others never arrive at all. Each missing ship is a blank space on the board, a gap that no amount of shouting can fill. Admiral Koga's staff begins to speak in careful code even among themselves. Not the code of ciphers, but the code of pride. No one says the words directly. Not yet. They circle it like destroyers around a submarine contact. One night, a conference is called after midnight. The room is lit by a single shaded lamp, the kind that makes every face look older. A chart of the Central Pacific is spread wide, with pins marking attacks along routes that should have been unpredictable. Koga listens to the escort reports again. Bearings, times, weather. He knows sailors will blame fate before they blame procedure. Yet the details are too clean. A captain from operations points to a pin near the marshals. This convoy altered course twice due to weather. Sir, the changes were not broadcast beyond the escort group. And still, another officer mutters. The submarines arrived. Koga's eyes harden. How many torpedoes were expended? 14, sir, the captain answers. The enemy fired with confidence, not probing, not guessing. Koga turns his gaze to the communications officer. What traffic went out that week? The officer, pale from sleepless watches, flips through a log. Routine, status reports, fuel requests, acknowledgements, reduced length as ordered. Koga taps the table once, sharply. Reduced length is not the same as silence. He walks to the window, out beyond the palm silhouettes. Ship lights blink on the water like nervous eyes. We are fighting an enemy who hunts with ears, he says quietly. If our mouth keeps moving, their teeth will keep closing. In Tokyo, the Navy General Staff hears the same story. Their rooms smell different from truck, more polished wood and ink, less fuel oil. But the anxiety is the same. On a winter morning, A briefing reaches senior hands that have signed orders since the war began. The numbers are laid out with the cold precision of an accountant. Tonnage lost, fuel not delivered, garrisons that cannot be reinforced, pilots grounded because aviation gasoline is late or gone. A senior staff officer in Tokyo tries to frame it as enemy skill, as bad luck. Then an admiral with a face like carved stone interrupts. Bad luck does not repeat itself with such discipline, he says. If it repeats, it is not luck. It is information. Back at truck, Koga orders further restrictions. Dispatches are limited. Some captains are instructed to make sail without announcing precise departure times, as if secrecy can be created after the fact. Radio rooms become quiet, operators staring at equipment that has turned from tool into liability. And still, the sea keeps taking their ships. The turning point is not a single sinking. It is a growing pattern of terror that moves faster than any destroyer. Escorts begin to feel it. In reports, they describe sightings that happen too soon, contacts that appear too precisely, attacks that begin within hours of a convoy's change of course. One escort commander writes, in a hand that looks like it pressed hard into the paper. The enemy acts as if he has our schedule. A younger officer reading the report whispers a thought he should not say aloud, as if he has our message. February 1944 brings a new shock, the kind that makes even proud officers stop pretending. Truk, once spoken of like an impregnable fortress, becomes a trap. American carrier aircraft roar over the lagoon. Bombs hammer ships at anchor. Smoke climbs in greasy columns, and the water fills with burning debris. In the aftermath, sailors stand on the quays and watch oil spread across the lagoon like a black skin. Officers try to explain how the enemy struck so confidently, so far from American bases, as if guided by a map drawn inside the Japanese headquarters itself. Koga's face is gray when he speaks to his staff afterward. They did not come here by instinct, he says. They came here by knowledge. Someone finally says the forbidden idea more openly now, because after the lagoon burns, pride has less to protect. It is our communications. Sir, it must be. Koga does not explode. He does not deny it with the old certainty. Instead, he looks at the charts, at the convoy lines now rerouted like wounded arteries. Then we are bleeding through the radio. He answers. Spring 1944 arrives with more disaster. Aircraft are lost. Fuel stocks shrink. Destroyers that should be training for battle are chained to escort duty, running back and forth across seas that no longer feel wide enough to hide in. Then comes a blow that feels like fate turning its knife. A flight carrying senior officers and documents goes down in bad weather. In the scramble to recover what was lost, fear blooms in whispers. Not just fear of death, but fear that paper and plans could fall into enemy hands. In a closed room, a staff officer says what everyone has been thinking since the first convoy vanished. What if they already have our routes? He murmurs. Because we hand them to the air itself. No one answers him. The silence is answer enough, and far away. Beyond the horizon, American submarines keep appearing at the right place, at the right time, as if the Pacific has become a narrow corridor with invisible walls. June 10th, 1944. Tokyo, Navy Ministry. Rain taps softly against the windows like a patient, relentless signal. Inside a conference room, the lights are bright and unforgiving. Maps cover the walls. Shipping charts lie open on a long table. Corners held down by ashtrays and paperweights. Every rote looks like a gamble, and every gamble looks rigged. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, now wearing the weight of the combined fleet on his shoulders, stands at the head of the table. Around him sit men who have commanded battleships, carrier divisions, entire theaters. They have watched the Pacific shrink while the enemy grows larger. They have sent convoys out and received only empty sea in return. Toyoda speaks first. voice steady but tired. We have reduced transmissions. We have changed routes. We have increased escorts. Yet our shipping continues to be intercepted with accuracy that cannot be explained by chance. A staff officer points to a chart. This is the latest convoy to the Marianas. It altered course twice due to weather. The submarine still met it at the second alteration point within half a day. Another officer, from Naval Intelligence, flips through a folder thick with reports. Escort commanders describe attacks that begin within hours of their departures, sometimes before they have even reached predictable lanes. Toyota listens, then nods once. Then we must accept that the enemy has a window into our movements. The room shifts. The sentence is careful, but it is the closest thing to a confession they have made. Some men stare at the table. Others stare into the middle distance, as if looking at the dark surface of the sea where torpedo tracks begin. A vice admiral clears his throat. If the enemy can read our signals, then every transmission is a flare in the night. Toyota does not disagree. Yes, that single word lands heavier than any shell. What is said next is not shouted. It is the quiet talk of men who have finally run out of easier explanations. One admiral speaks with the discipline of someone forcing each syllable into place. We must consider that our primary naval ciphers have been compromised. Another adds, even more restrained, or that traffic analysis alone reveals too much. Even if our words are hidden, our habits may not be. Toyota rubs his fingertips together, as if feeling for grit. Either way, the result is the same. Our supply line is exposed for a moment. They stop talking about ships and start talking about ghosts. Not in superstition, but in the sense that a presence has been living alongside them all this time, unseen but attentive. An intelligence officer offers a cautious phrase. There is no evidence of physical sabotage in our ports on the scale required. The enemy's advantage appears to be in interception and interpretation of our communications. Toyota's gaze is sharp. Then why are we still behaving as if the sea is empty? The answer is obvious, but it still hurts. Because what else can they do? The war runs on fuel and food and ammunition. If you do not transmit, you lose coordination. If you transmit, you invite the enemy. In the weeks that follow, procedures tighten into something almost desperate. Radio discipline becomes ritual. Operators are drilled until they can encode in their sleep. Messages are broken into fragments, delayed, rerouted. Convoys are told to sail under strict silence, relying on prearranged schedules and sealed orders, opened only at sea. And still, the sinkings do not stop. On the water, the change feels like being hunted in a forest where every snapped twig gives you away. A transport captain stands on his bridge at dusk, watching escorts weave ahead. He wants to ask the radio room for weather updates or submarine warnings. He does not, because the new rule is silence. Silence is survival, but silence is also blindness. A destroyer captain, escorting another convoy, writes later that the men began to fear their own radios. The set is bolted to the bulkhead like an innocent machine, but the crew looks at it as if it might whisper to the enemy the moment they turn their backs. In one escort group, a junior officer steps into the radio shack and sees the operator hesitating with his hand over the key. The operator's lips move soundlessly, as if praying. Then he sends a short acknowledgement anyway, because orders demand it. Hours later, a submarine attack begins. The convoy does not have time to understand how it happened. It only experiences it. The sudden crash beneath a freighter's bow, the column of water and steel, the ship's list that grows minute by minute, men running with hoses and shoring timbers. The escort's depth charges rolling off stern racks in a frantic pattern that suggests more hope than certainty. Afterward, in the report, the escort commander uses a phrase that appears again and again by this stage of the war. The enemy was waiting. By late June 1944, the Marianas become the next battlefield. Carrier aircraft scream overhead, Warships clash, and behind the battle line, the dull, grinding crisis continues, the quiet catastrophe of logistics. It reaches a point where senior officers no longer debate the idea in abstract terms. They speak as if it is already proven, because the evidence has become their daily life. In private conversations, a phrase circulates among admirals, spoken with bitterness rather than surprise. The Americans know our routes before our captains do. It is an exaggeration, but only barely. Because the Japanese system, built on careful planning and centralized control, produces patterns, patterns become predictability. Predictability becomes death. Toyoda meets again with senior staff, and his words are clipped, almost harsh. If we cannot protect the flow of oil and supplies, he says, then we cannot fight. Not with courage, not with sacrifice, not with any battle plan. A staff officer suggests changing codes. Another suggests deeper deception, false routing signals, dummy convoys, deliberate noise. A third suggests restricting all but the most critical transmissions. Toyoda listens, then gives the conclusion that hangs over the room like smoke. We are no longer merely fighting ships, he says. We are fighting an enemy that is inside the structure of our war. And in the Pacific, the structure is the supply line, the thin thread that connects islands and garrisons and fleets. If the enemy can see that thread, then the enemy can cut it wherever he chooses. Assume the enemy is listening. July 3rd, 1944. Inland Sea, Japan. A transport captain stands on a pier beside stacked drums of fuel and crates of ammunition. The air smells of tar, salt, and summer heat. He watches sailors lash cargo down, watched in turn by naval police who look for loose tongues and sloppy routines. A sealed envelope is handed to him by an officer from operations. The captain bows, receives it with both hands, and doesn't open it. Not yet. He can feel the paper like a weight. The route is inside. The timing is inside. Perhaps the death is inside too. On the bridge that evening, the envelope is opened only after they clear the headlands. The orders are brief, almost brutal in their simplicity. Maintain radio silence. No position reports unless attacked. Follow the listed waypoints exactly unless weather forces deviation. If deviation occurs, do not transmit. Decide locally. Local decisions. That is new. That is frightening. The Imperial Navy was built on coordinated movement and precise control. Now it is being forced into a kind of lonely improvisation, each captain hoping his private choice will not be the one the enemy anticipates. In Tokyo, the naval staff explores deception. They talk about it the way artillery officers talk about smoke screens. If the Americans are reading the sea lanes through signals intelligence, then the sea lanes must be made foggy. Dummy traffic is proposed. False routing instructions are drafted and transmitted on purpose. Convoys are split, recombined, or delayed without notice. Some escorts are ordered to make aggressive sweeps along routes no convoy will use, creating the impression of importance. A few empty ships are considered as decoys, bait for submarines. The plan looks clever on paper. On the ocean, it meets the simplest enemy of all, reality. Because Japan's merchant fleet is shrinking, escorts are overworked. Fuel is precious. Every decoy burns oil. Every false operation consumes hours and men and steel. Deception is expensive, and Japan is getting poorer by the week. In a darkened operations room, an admiral looks at the list of available ships and feels the war tightening like a vice. We can deceive, he mutters, or we can deliver cargo. We cannot afford to do both. Meanwhile, the islands begin to starve in slow motion. On a garrison in the Central Pacific, soldiers stand under a sun that feels like a hammer and watch the sea for a ship that does not come. The horizon is empty. The radio brings only static and brief, coded bursts from distant headquarters. Rice rations are cut, then cut again. A lieutenant in that garrison writes in his diary that they used to talk about victory, then about endurance, and now they talk about food. They talk about whether the supply ship might arrive at night, blacked out, slipping past American patrols. They talk about the sound of engines that never appears. At sea, convoys move like nervous animals, hugging weather fronts, weaving at night, turning off navigation lights. Escorts run zigzags until their crews are exhausted. Lookouts stare until their eyes ache. Every floating log becomes a periscope in imagination. And still, the attacks come. An escort commander reports that a submarine fired from an ideal position as the convoy passed a point that had not been broadcast. The commander writes it in the stiff language of the service, but his frustration leaks through the formality. He notes that the enemy appeared to anticipate a turn made to avoid a squall line. In the margin, someone in headquarters has written a single word: impossible. But it keeps happening, and impossible becomes routine. In a closed meeting, a senior admiral begins listing what they have done and how little it has helped. We shortened messages. We rotated call signs. We used alternative routes. We delayed departures. We transmitted false instructions, yet the enemy continues to find us. He stops, then says what no one wants to hear. Their advantage may not be only what we say. It may be what we are. Meaning patterns, habits, logistics that force ships through certain choke points, the limited number of ports that can load oil, the limited number of escorts that can cover routes. Even if you change the route, you still need to arrive. Even if you keep silent, the schedule of needs reveals itself. An intelligence officer adds, voice low. Even if our highest level ciphers are secure, the enemy can still piece together convoy movements from lower level traffic. Port signals, escort group coordination, administrative messages. Toyota's staff absorbs it with grim faces. The enemy does not need one perfect key if he has many small clues. So they press harder, they order stricter discipline, they punish careless transmission, they instruct captains to avoid predictable zigzag patterns. They emphasize night sailing, they begin to rely more on couriers, on physical delivery of orders where possible. Because paper handed from one man to another feels safer than radio waves spilling into the Pacific. But couriers are slow. Couriers can be shot down. Couriers cannot coordinate a battle in real time. Every solution creates a new vulnerability. A destroyer captain, after another convoy loss, stands on deck at dawn with salt crusting his collar. He looks at the empty water where a transport sank hours earlier. The wreckage floats in a lazy drift, barrels and planks and the occasional body that bobs once, then rolls away. He speaks to his executive officer without turning his head. We are escorting ghosts. The executive officer does not answer. He cannot. Back in Tokyo, the admirals begin to speak of the merchant fleet as if it were a patient hemorrhaging faster than anyone can bandage. Every convoy that fails does not just remove cargo. It removes the ability to attempt the next convoy. It is the kind of loss that compounds. By late summer 1944, the phrase that circulates in private becomes even darker. The enemy does not need to defeat our fleet if he can starve it. And that is the terrifying truth of signals intelligence. It does not always explode like sabotage. It does not always announce itself. It simply makes your movements visible. And once visible, they become targetable. Out on the Pacific routes, another convoy leaves harbor under strict silence. The captains believe they have done everything right this time. The course is unusual. The timing is odd. The orders were hand-delivered. The sea is calm. Then a lookout calls out, voice cracking, torpedo wake. Starboard. The escorts turn hard. The first explosion slams up through a freighter's hull. Somewhere in the chaos, someone thinks the same thought that has haunted them for months. They knew we were coming. September 9th, 1944. Tokyo. A secure conference room under the Navy Ministry. Outside. The city moves with forced normality. Inside. The atmosphere is brittle. You can hear paper slide across wood like sand. Admiral Toyoda sits with several senior commanders and staff. The table is crowded with shipping loss summaries, convoy schedules, escort availability charts. Each document is stamped and re-stamped, as if ink can compensate for failure. A vice admiral speaks first, voice tight. We have received another report from the oil route. 2 tankers lost, 1 damaged. Escorts report the enemy attacked at the precise point the convoy would have to reduce speed due to sea state. Toyoda's eyes do not lift. And our transmissions? Minimal, the vice admiral replies. None that should have revealed the point. Should have, Toyoda repeats softly. A younger staff officer, nervous, adds, the escort commander believes there may be an informant in the ports. The room reacts instantly. It is the easiest explanation because it preserves pride. A spy can be hunted. A spy can be punished. A spy can be blamed. But an older admiral, a man who has seen too many patterns to tolerate comfort, cuts through it. If there is an informant, he says, then he is everywhere at once. He taps the table with a knuckle. The enemy strikes in open ocean as well. He meets us on routes changed without announcement. That is not a dock worker. That is not a fisherman. That is not gossip. He lets the silence settle, then says the thing that has been creeping into every private discussion. That is our signals. No one protests now. They only choose how to talk about it. The conversation becomes a careful dance between anger and acceptance. A staff captain, face flushed, speaks with controlled outrage. Then our cryptographic section has failed us. The chief of communications stiffens. We have followed procedure. Keys changed as ordered. Message lengths reduced. Discipline enforced. Procedure, the staff captain snaps, means nothing if the enemy has already broken the system. Toyoda raises a hand. The room stops. His tone is not comforting. It is final. Arguing about blame does not bring back ships, he says. We must understand what the enemy can do and act accordingly. An intelligence officer slides forward a memorandum, not an accusation, but a set of observations. Convoys attacked soon after departure, submarines waiting at waypoint intersections, American forces arriving where Japanese planners assumed secrecy. The officer does not say the words spy sabotage. He uses a different phrase, one that sounds almost clinical. The enemy appears to possess advanced knowledge of convoy movements consistent with signals exploitation. Toyoda reads it, then looks up. His expression is the kind a man wears when he realizes the battlefield has been under his feet the whole time. So what did Japanese admirals say when the evidence became undeniable? They said it in fragments, in sentences shaped by tradition and pride. One admiral, after reading a convoy loss report, mutters, "It is as if they are sitting in our radio room." Another, more bitter, says, "We send the enemy an invitation with every transmission." A third, still clinging to old instincts, insists, "Our main cipher is unbreakable." But his voice lacks conviction, and even he knows he's speaking to the past, not the present, in private. Some try to frame it as sabotage, because sabotage implies a human hand and a fixable breach. They speak of traitors, of stolen code books, of compromised stations. Naval police are asked to investigate ports, radio crews, even clerks. Men are questioned. Records are checked. The machinery of suspicion turns, grinding up morale. But the ocean keeps answering with torpedo wakes. By October 1944, after still more losses, the language shifts again. Admirals stop saying unbreakable. They stop saying impossible. They begin saying dangerous. Radio is dangerous. Pattern is dangerous. Habit is dangerous. Any certainty is dangerous. A convoy officer, in an after-action meeting, says something that sounds small but carries a vast meaning. We must assume the enemy knows. Assume the enemy knows. It becomes a doctrine whispered between lines, never proudly proclaimed, but shaping everything. The irony is painful. Japan, which once relied on decisive battle, now finds itself fighting a war of endurance and logistics. And endurance is exactly what code-breaking destroys. It does not need to sink the whole fleet in a day. It only needs to make supply predictable. Then starvation does the rest. Some admirals respond with anger that borders on despair. One slams a fist on the table and says, "If our communications are compromised, then we are blind and deaf." Another responds more quietly, "No, we are not blind. We are naked, because blindness is ignorance. Nakedness is being seen." Out at sea, convoy commanders absorb these orders with a kind of resigned dread. They are told to keep silent, to avoid routine, to change speeds, to sail in poor weather. They do these things, and still they die. So the sailors create their own explanation. Crude but honest. They say the Americans have magic. They say the Americans smell fuel through the water. They say the Americans are already waiting at the next turn because the ocean itself tells them. The admirals do not say magic. They say intelligence. They say interception. They say exploitation. And by late 1944, behind closed doors, the most senior among them stop debating the possibility and speak as if it is fact. The enemy has broken into our operational planning. The words are never shouted. They are spoken like a verdict. The meeting ends without satisfaction. Toyota stands, straightens his uniform, and looks at the maps one more time. Routes, ports, waypoints. All of it feels exposed, like a body under harsh light. He leaves the room knowing that whatever great fleet actions remain, whatever battles are planned, they will be fought on a starving foundation. And starvation does not care how brave a sailor is. December 20th, 1944. South China Sea, west of Luzon. Night. The horizon is a low black blade. The sea is rough enough to throw spray across the bows, and the convoy rides it like a line of tired animals pressed forward by fear. A tanker steams in the middle of the formation, its silhouette heavy and precious. Destroyers pace the perimeter, engines straining, crews soaked, lookouts gripping railings with numb fingers. The convoy commander has done everything the new doctrine demands. Departed without fanfare. Minimal traffic. Route altered by sealed orders. Speed changed at irregular intervals. Yet in the pit of his stomach, he feels the same dread as every other convoy commander now. Not dread of a submarine that might be out there. Dread of a submarine that is already there because it was told. A lookout cries out, and the words are swallowed by wind. A flare of white appears on the water. Torpedo wake. The escort swings hard. Searchlights stab the darkness. Guns open up on a patch of sea that looks empty. Then the tanker takes a hit. The explosion is not a single sound, but a layered violence. Metal tearing, fuel igniting, a deep thump that you feel through the deck. Fire climbs immediately, painting the waves orange. Men run. Orders are screamed. Hoses come alive. Damage control teams race into heat that feels like an opened furnace. The tanker begins to list. Slow at first, then with frightening momentum. The destroyers drop depth charges in a pattern that shakes teeth. The sea erupts behind the convoy in tall, boiling columns. The convoy commander stares at the burning tanker and knows, with the kind of certainty that does not require proof, that the submarine commander did not guess. He knew where to be. Back in Tokyo, the report arrives with the same sterile language as always, but everyone who reads it imagines the orange glow on black water. Admirals and staff officers do not have to pretend anymore. They do not have to use cautious phrases. The losses are too frequent, the accuracy too consistent. A senior officer murmurs in frustration, "Even our silence speaks." Because silence does not erase patterns. Ports still load cargo. Ships still must depart from somewhere. They still must cross certain seas. They still must deliver to islands that are fixed points on a map. The enemy does not need to hear every message. He only needs enough pieces to reconstruct the picture. And by the end of 1944, the picture is catastrophic. Fuel shortages become the quiet master of every plan. Destroyers remain in harbor because they cannot spare the oil to escort. Training sorties are cut. Air units ration flight time. A carrier division exists more as a name than as a force. Its pilots present, its decks ready, but its tanks half empty. On the islands, hunger becomes a tactical condition. Soldiers dig gardens in coral soil. They eat less. They grow weaker. Their weapons remain, but their bodies do not match the steel in their hands. The American advantage is not only in ships and planes. It is in information that turns the Pacific into something like a glass bowl. Japanese admirals speak of routes the way doomed men speak of exits in a burning building. One says, "There is no safe lane left." Another answers, "Because the enemy has made the sea into a map." In early 1945, the situation does not improve. It tightens. Convoys become smaller and more desperate. More cargo is pushed onto fewer ships because there are fewer hulls to carry it. That makes every sinking even more devastating. As if the war itself is compressing into fewer and fewer targets. Escorts are stretched thin. Some convoys sail with inadequate protection because the alternative is not sailing at all. And not sailing means garrisons do not eat. Aircraft do not fly. Fleets do not move. In a final, bitter twist, the measures meant to protect the codes can slow decision-making. Orders carried by courier arrive too late. Sealed instructions cannot adapt to sudden changes. A captain at sea faces a storm, a mechanical failure, a submarine warning from a scout plane. He must choose without guidance. If he transmits, he risks revealing himself. If he stays silent, he risks blundering into an ambush. So he chooses. And then the enemy appears anyway. By this stage, what Japanese admirals say is no longer guesswork or denial. It is a grim recognition that the war has an invisible front. The first things they said were questions. Why are they always waiting? How do they always know? Who is talking? Then the questions changed into statements. Our transmissions betray us. Our habits betray us. The enemy reads the flow of our war. And finally, the statements became a kind of surrender to reality. Not surrender of the war, but surrender of an illusion. We cannot hide in the Pacific anymore. The Pacific is too vast to patrol in the old sense. Yet somehow it has become too small to disappear inside. Every supply ship that sails feels like it is moving across a stage under a spotlight. This is what signals intelligence does when it works perfectly. It does not look like sabotage. It looks like fate. Ships vanish with such regularity that sailors begin to believe the ocean has chosen sides. But the admirals understand. They do not need to name the American codebreakers or the radio intercept stations to feel their presence. They feel it in the timing of attacks, in the placement of submarines, in the precision that turns their last lifeline into a predictable trail. On paper, Japan still has commands, charts, staffs, uniforms, ceremonies. But beneath the paper, the supply line is collapsing. And when the supply line collapses, everything collapses with it. In that sense, the decisive blows are not always the great battles that fill histories. Sometimes the decisive blow is the quiet one, the one that happens every week, every convoy, every time a radio key clicks and the enemy hears. The war in the Pacific ends not only with fire and surrender, but with a long, grinding truth. When the Americans could see the supply lines, they could cut them, and once cut, Japan bled out across the ocean, one intercepted convoy at a time.